Hi, I'm talking about Cochiti Pueblo pottery. In my earlier video I discussed the pots like this, the Ollas, and the smaller jars and canteens, but really what I'd like to focus on today are the figurines. This is really the tradition at Cochiti Pueblo. In fact, when Stevenson came and investigated the pottery making at the Pueblo in 1879, he discovered that the majority of the pots that were being made were these figurine type pots. Now the figurines, the earliest ones, are what we call the opera singers. And as you can see in this image, they have very large open mouths, they're tall. This particular specimen is 18 inches in height. And these big opera singers can bring as much as 25,000 on the open market. They're very rare and they were broken often. Generally what you would see in the early pottery at Cochiti, the figurines, would be things like this, which might be a bear or a dog even. You have things like this, which is a duck, and you'll see that it has different design elements involved. And again, you see the black dots that are on this. Lots of design elements is very typical of the Cochiti, and this would have been a figurine. Now, you also found at the same time in Tesuque that they were making figurines as well. Jake Gold, who owned a store in Santa Fe, would sell not only Cochiti figurines, but also the Tesuque. This is the typical Tesuque rain god. This dates from about 1880s. And these things were made anywhere from the 1880s all the way to the 1960s. The earliest ones are just like this, plain. Then they started adding paint and then even poster paints as they got onto the 60s. This is actually a Tesuque figurine as well. It's a little more ornate. It's a little different in composition. And it's a little hard, I will say, even for the experts, to determine things like this from this, Tesuque and Cochiti. The good news is, from a price structure, it probably doesn't really matter. Now, starting in 1964, Helen Cordero started making these, which are the Storytellers. Helen began to pot. She tried to make regular pots like this, but really found that she didn't have much aptitude for it. So she made a storyteller. This is actually a man, and all her storytellers are men. And this first one, this dates from about the 70s, but the first one done in 1964 was such a hit that the great folk art collector Alexandra Gerard said, you know, you should do more of these and add kids. And so she did. In fact, Gerard collected many of these early ones, and then her thing kind of took off. And not only did it take off for her, but it also took off for other Pueblo potters in Cochiti, as well as surrounding in Jemez and other places too. This is an opera singer, but it's actually a remake of one that was done in about the 1980s or 90s. Now, for Helen's work, these storytellers, the value comes in with the more the kids, the more valuable they'll be. You'll also see storytellers that were really drummers. The drummer was probably done for her husband Fred, who was a drum maker at Cochiti, and it was in his honor. The most valuable of these dolls are the ones that are anywhere from the earliest ones, which were made in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The ones in the 90s got a little bit slip change, and she was getting older. She died in 1994. In fact, when she died, she used to charge $1,000 per storyteller. A storyteller like this today might run $7,000 to $8,000, and they can run up to $12,000 to $15,000 depending on how many kids they are. The tradition is a long time tradition. It's still being done today. There's lots of living artists that are making. One of the most famous is Virgil Ortiz, who's had numerous museum exhibits just on his Cochiti figurines, and they're in lots of collections throughout the world. So if you enjoy Cochiti figurines, think of Helen Cordero and also think of the opera singers.